March 14th, 1994, Las Vegas, Nevada, 11:47 p.m. The Strip is alive, the way it always is. Neon bleeds into the desert sky. Slot machines ring in cascading waves. The air smells like cigarette smoke and cheap optimism. Inside the MGM Grand, everything is operating exactly as it should. Dealers shuffle cards with practiced hands. Cocktail waitresses move through the crowd without spilling a drop. Pit bosses scan the floor from their elevated perches. Nothing looks unusual. And that is exactly the problem. At table 14 inches the high roller baccarat room, a woman sits down for the fourth time this week. She is dressed conservatively, no flashy jewelry, no dramatic entrance. She orders water, not champagne. She tips modestly. She loses just enough to look like a regular player. And then quietly, methodically, she starts winning. The pit boss notices. He always notices, but the pattern never triggers an alarm. She never wins too much, never too fast, never in a way that a camera can pin down. She cashes out at exactly the right moment. She leaves through a side exit. She won't be back at this table for another 3 weeks. Her name, at least tonight, is Sandra Wells. By next month, she'll be someone else entirely. If you're new here, subscribe and turn on notifications. Stories like this one, you don't want to miss the ending. It started not with a bang, but with a number. In the spring of 1993, a low-level surveillance analyst named Doug Farrow was reviewing footage from the Mirage. Routine work. He was 3 hours into a 4-hour shift when something made him pause. He rewound the tape. A woman at a blackjack table had won 11 hands in a row. That alone wasn't impossible. What stopped Doug wasn't the wins. It was the way she paused before each hand. A barely perceptible hesitation, like someone listening for something no one else could hear. He flagged it, filed a report, added her photo to the watch list. Then he went home and forgot about it. 6 months later, the same woman appeared at Caesar's Palace. Different hair, different name on the player's card, but the same pause before the same type of hand. Doug found the footage again. He stayed late that night, then the next night, then every night for a week. By the end of that week, he had found her in footage from 4 different casinos, spanning 2 years, using at least 3 different identities. He had found someone who had built a system. He just had no idea yet how deep it went. To understand what she was doing, you need to understand what she was doing it to. Las Vegas casinos in the 1990s were not just gambling halls. They were surveillance fortresses. The MGM Grand alone employed over 200 security personnel. Every inch of every floor was watched. Every dealer was monitored. Every chip had a weight signature. The mathematics of casino gambling are brutal and permanent. The house edge on blackjack sits between 0.5% and 2%. On baccarat, it's around 1.06% on banker bets. Run millions of hands through those percentages, and the casino will always come out ahead. That is the foundation on which a billion-dollar industry is built. The illusion of possibility layered over the certainty of mathematics. And someone was breaking it. Not with sleight of hand, not with marked cards, not with any technique casino security had trained for decades to detect. She was breaking it from the inside out, using a vulnerability the industry hadn't fully confronted yet. The stakes were enormous, not just for the money she took, but for what her success revealed. The system had a flaw. The fortress had a door no one had locked. And she had found the key 15 years before anyone thought to look. By the time investigators began piecing together her history, the scope of what she had done was staggering. In 1989, she walked into the Desert Inn with $400 in cash. Over the next 11 hours, she turned it into $22,000. She left before the shift change. The casino wrote it off as a bad night. In 1991, she worked a single baccarat table at Caesar's Palace across 4 separate visits. Different name each time. Combined take, just under $80,000. Each loss was calculated. Each win looked like variance. In 1993, she coordinated what investigators later called the Palm Springs Relay. At least 3 associates worked different tables at 3 different casinos. The signals were so subtle that trained surveillance staff reviewed the footage 17 times and still couldn't agree on what they were seeing. In 1996, she exploited a loophole in a newly opened casino's comp tracking system. The casino lost $140,000 over a single weekend. No laws were technically broken. They quietly closed the loophole and never told anyone. In 1998, she came the closest anyone ever had to emptying a mid-sized casino's baccarat reserve in a single evening. Nearly $300,000. The pit boss shut the table down on a pretextual mechanical excuse. She was not lucky. She was precise. There is a difference, and that difference was worth millions. Her real name took investigators years to confirm. Even then, they weren't entirely sure. She went by Sandra Wells in 1994, by Catherine Moon in 1996, by Louise Ferron in 1997. Loyalty card applications listed 4 different addresses, 3 different birth dates, and 2 different social security numbers, both belonging to deceased women. What they knew. She was approximately 5'4". Dark hair, though its length and style changed. She appeared to be in her mid-30s to mid-40s. She favored understated clothing. She never wore heels. She was ambidextrous, which confused behavioral analysts trained to read hand dominance as a tell. What they didn't know. Almost everything else. Where was she from? Unknown. Who trained her? Unknown. Did she act alone? Or was she the visible face of a larger operation? Unknown. The working estimate among Nevada Gaming Control Board investigators was somewhere between $2 and $4 million, net, after expenses. After paying associates, some investigators believed the real number was higher. Some believed it was much higher. The confirmation that she was real came in November 1999. A casino in Henderson, Nevada, had just installed a new facial recognition system, one of the first of its kind in the industry. On a Thursday evening, it flagged a woman entering the main casino floor. The flag was low confidence, 61% match. Normally that wouldn't trigger a response. But the on-duty security supervisor that night was Carl Whitmore, a former Gaming Control Board investigator who had spent 3 years studying that exact database entry. He knew the face. Not from the algorithm, from memory. He watched her on the monitor for 4 minutes. Then he picked up the phone and called the Gaming Control Board. She was in the building. She was real. For the first time in 6 years of investigation, someone had eyes on her in real time. Carl did not approach her. The order was to watch and document. Approaching would spook her. They needed evidence of the method. So he watched. She played baccarat for 2 hours. She won modestly. She left. But this time, for the first time, they had her on high-resolution camera. Entering from a known direction, leaving in a known vehicle, heading toward a known exit off the 95. The net was tightening. Word traveled fast, but quietly. The casino industry does not publicize its vulnerabilities. A casino that announces it has been systematically defrauded does not fill seats. The instinct is containment. Silence. Fix the problem and never let the public know it existed. But behind closed doors, the reaction was seismic. Within weeks of the Henderson sighting, the Nevada Resort Association convened a private security summit. 15 of the largest casino operators sent their heads of surveillance. The Gaming Control Board sent 2 senior investigators. The FBI sent an observer, not officially and not on the record. What had been a loose watch list problem was now a coordinated task force. The Association of Certified Fraud Examiners was quietly briefed on the case as a training example, names and locations scrubbed. In Atlantic City, 3 major casinos updated their watch protocols. In Mississippi, new employee training modules were written specifically around her methods without ever naming her. She had become, in the most ironic sense possible, a consultant to the industry she was robbing. She just didn't know it yet. The task force had a problem. Several problems, actually. First, most of what she had done was not clearly illegal under Nevada law at the time. Card counting is not a crime. Disguising your appearance is not a crime. Using a false name on a loyalty card is technically fraud, but proving intent, proving the same person across multiple identities, required evidence they didn't yet have. Second, the best witnesses were the casinos themselves, and the casinos were deeply reluctant to testify. To testify was to admit the losses. To admit the losses was to invite questions about their security failures. Third, time. Whatever method she was using had a shelf life. The facial recognition systems were improving. The inter-casino networks were tightening. If she was smart enough to run this for a decade, she was smart enough to know the walls were closing. Lead investigator Dana Reyes made the call in early 2000. They would not wait for perfect evidence. They would follow the threads they had. The thread led to a storage facility in North Las Vegas, rented under a name that matched none of the known aliases. Paid in cash, 18 months in advance. Inside, a filing cabinet. Locked. When they opened it legally, with a warrant, they found something that changed the entire shape of the investigation. Inside that filing cabinet were records. Detailed, methodical, obsessive records. Notes on dealer shuffle patterns at 11 different casinos. Diagrams of camera placement and rotation timing accurate to within seconds. Shift change schedules. Notations on which pit bosses were attentive and which were not. Records of which tables used which shoe configurations. And a handwritten probability matrix that a gaming mathematician later called one of the most sophisticated pieces of applied game theory he had ever seen produced outside of an academic setting. The question everyone asked immediately, who was she? Theory 1, she was a former casino employee, someone who had worked on the inside and used that knowledge to build her system. This fit the depth of her operational knowledge. It fit the accuracy of her camera diagrams. Theory 2, she was academically trained, a mathematician or statistician who had applied probability theory to real-world casino conditions. The matrix pointed here. This was not intuition. This was someone who had done the math. Theory 3. She was not working alone at a conceptual level. She was the operational front for a larger group that had provided the research, the infrastructure, and the false identities. And she was the face. The one who sat at the tables. The one who took the risk. Investigators did not agree on which theory was right. Some believed all three were partially true. In the spring of 2001, the task force arrested a woman in a rental car outside the Bellagio. Her name on the ID she carried was Marie Solis. She was 44 years old. She matched the physical description in every way that mattered. She had $14,000 in cash in a money belt. She had a burner phone purchased at a drugstore in Phoenix. For 72 hours, investigators believed they had her. She said almost nothing. She asked for a lawyer within the first 4 minutes, and then exercised her right to silence with a calm that Dana Reyes would later describe as the most unnerving interview experience of her career. Then the fingerprint results came back. The prints matched a woman named Patricia Ann Holloway, from Tucson, Arizona, a hospitality management background, a minor expunged offense, no casino experience on record, no academic background in mathematics, no known connections to organized crime. It didn't fit. Dana Reyes sat with that discomfort for a long time. And then Patricia Holloway posted bail, walked out of the Clark County Detention Center, and disappeared. 3 weeks after the Holloway release, an envelope arrived at the Gaming Control Board offices in Carson City. No return address, postmarked from Sacramento. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Printed in neat block letters were the names and addresses of 4 casinos in Nevada and 2 in Mississippi. Next to each was a date all in the past and a dollar amount. The total across all 6 casinos, $2.1 million. At the bottom of the page, a single handwritten line. You arrested the wrong woman. Investigators verified the amounts against internal casino loss records within 48 hours. Every figure was accurate. Some matched losses that had never been officially reported. Losses the casinos had classified internally as accounting anomalies. Whoever sent this letter had access to information no outside party should have had. The task force reconvened immediately. The Holloway arrest was reclassified. She was either a decoy, deliberately placed in that rental car to draw investigators away, or an innocent woman who had been set up with extraordinary precision. Either possibility was terrifying, because both of them pointed to the same conclusion. The woman they were hunting was still out there. She was watching them, and she was not done. The letter changed everything. What had been a Nevada problem was now a federal problem. The FBI formally opened a case. Interstate wire fraud, identity theft across state lines, possible RICO implications. Congressional staffers on the Senate Commerce Committee began asking quiet questions about the Gaming Control Board's investigative capacity, questions nobody in Carson City enjoyed answering. The insurance companies that underwrote major casino operations began their own parallel investigation. Lloyd's of London sent a forensic team to Las Vegas. They were not there to help the criminal case. They were there to determine whether the casino's security failures voided their claims. The casinos stopped being reluctant witnesses. They opened their records. They opened their archives. For the first time, the task force had full cooperation from every major property on the Strip. And what those records revealed was a timeline that stretched back further than anyone had imagined. The first confirmed operation wasn't 1,993. It wasn't 1,991. It was 1,988. She had been doing this for 13 years before the Henderson sighting, before Doug Farrow's late nights, before Dana Reyes inherited the case. The task force had been 15 years behind from the moment they started. In October 2003, a woman boarded a flight from McCarran International Airport to Vancouver, British Columbia. She used a Canadian passport, a real one, legitimately issued, under a name with a real address and a real credit history built carefully over 6 years for exactly this moment. She had known for months the walls were closing. The facial recognition systems were now industry standard. The inter-casino network was seamless. Staying in Nevada was no longer viable. At the gate, a TSA officer glanced at her passport, stamped it, waved her through. The FBI field office in Las Vegas received an alert 47 minutes after her flight departed, a passport that shared a biographical data point with one of the known aliases in the task force database. It was a thin thread, the kind that gets dismissed on a busy Tuesday morning. It was not dismissed. Dana Reyes personally reviewed it within the hour. She made 2 phone calls, then she drove to McCarran and stood at the gate where the flight had departed. The flight had landed in Vancouver 20 minutes earlier. The legal mechanisms existed, but they were slow, months at minimum, possibly longer. And a woman who had spent 15 years being invisible in plain sight would not wait months. She was gone. The financial damage, as finally tabulated in the 2004 summary report, was significant. Between $2.8 million and $4.1 million taken from Nevada casinos alone. Additional losses in Mississippi, New Jersey, and investigators believed but could not confirm 2 gaming operations in California and Washington state. But the financial number was not the most consequential damage. Patricia Ann Holloway spent 11 months fighting to clear her name. She lost her job during the investigation. She lost her apartment. Fragments of that arrest followed her for years. 3 casino employees were quietly terminated, not for complicity, but for the surveillance gaps that had allowed the operation to run undetected. None of them were ever publicly named. None were ever told officially why they were let go. Across the industry, an estimated $340 million was spent in the 5 years following the case on upgraded facial recognition infrastructure, inter-casino data sharing systems, and behavioral analysis training. An industry that had prided itself on its surveillance capability had been forced to confront how completely that capability had failed. One woman, 15 years, and an entire industry rebuilt in her wake. The criminal case remained technically open in Nevada through at least 2009. Federal charges were never formally filed. To file them required identifying a defendant with enough certainty to survive a court challenge. The identity question was never fully resolved. The Gaming Control Board's internal investigation report ran to 340 pages. It was never made public. A heavily redacted version was released in 2006 response to a Freedom of Information request. Most of the relevant sections were blacked out. In 2005, the Nevada legislature passed a package of gaming security reforms. New identity fraud frameworks, closed loopholes, mandated cross-casino data sharing. The legislation made no public mention of the case that had prompted it. Dana Reyes retired from the Gaming Control Board in 2007. In a single interview on her retirement, she was asked whether the case had ever been resolved. She said, We know more than we did. We don't know everything we should. She declined to elaborate. In 2011, a true crime podcast touched briefly on the case, referring to the subject only as the Phantom, a nickname the task force had never officially used. The episode attracted a modest audience. No one came forward with new information. Here is what we know. For somewhere between 13 and 15 years, a woman walked into the most heavily surveilled commercial spaces in the United States and consistently, methodically took money that the industry's mathematics said was impossible to take. She did it with patience so extraordinary it bordered on inhuman. She built and maintained multiple identities across multiple states, across multiple decades without a single confirmed slip. She anticipated and adapted to every countermeasure the industry deployed, often before the industry knew the countermeasures were necessary. And then, when the moment was right, she left. Not in handcuffs, not in a courtroom, quietly, completely, on her own terms. Here is what we don't know. Where she is, whether she ever stopped. Whether the woman who boarded that flight to Vancouver is even the right person, or whether the task force spent 5 years chasing the face of an associate while the real architect sat somewhere else entirely, watching, amused. We don't know her real name. We don't know who trained her or whether anyone did. We don't know how much money she actually took. And here is the question that haunts every investigator who ever worked the case. If she was smart enough to do all of this, and she was she also smart enough to know that someday someone would piece the story together, would turn her 15 years into a case file, a cautionary tale, a documentary? And if she knew that if she planned for it, then the story we just told is exactly the story she wanted told. The method she wanted buried is buried. The identity she wanted hidden is hidden. And somewhere out there, in a city that may or may not have a casino, a woman who may or may not use her real name is thinking about exactly that. Or she has already forgotten about us entirely. Both possibilities are equally terrifying.